The war in the Caribbean is not being fought with ships or missiles, but with radio waves and computer codes. In the face of increasing aggression and electronic interference from the United States, China and Russia have taken a decisive step in Venezuela, installing what experts call the cyber shield, an electronic warfare and cyber defense center aimed at protecting Venezuela's digital sovereignty and ensuring the stability of all Latin America. What does this mean? It means that Venezuela is finally capable of neutralizing the espionage and GPS blocking that the U.S. has used to destabilize the region. The Pentagon is on high alert, as the Monroe Doctrine, which allowed unilateral U.S. intervention, is being challenged not by an invasion, but by a robust technological defense. Intelligence reports confirm that China, under the pretext of modernizing Venezuela's 5G network, has installed a dual-use data center with the capacity to protect satellite and submarine cable data traffic from external espionage. In parallel, Russia has supplied a high-power electronic warfare system capable of neutralizing GPS jamming and U.S. military communications in the Caribbean. This detailed script will expose the strategy of the Axis of Defense, the technology behind Caracas's cyber shield, and the escalation scenarios that show the desperate reaction of the U.S. to losing digital control in the continent. Prepare to understand how technology has become the main weapon for the defense of sovereignty. China is using its telecommunications expertise to establish a permanent intelligence defense presence in Venezuela, with direct consequences for regional security. The central element of the Chinese defense is the installation of a 5G, 6G data center in a strategic location in Venezuela. The objective: the center is presented as a civil infrastructure project to provide high-speed internet and modernize the Venezuelan telecommunications network, but its crucial role is cyber defense. The reality: this center functions as a cybersecurity node, with the capacity to detect and block the interception and analysis of information traffic passing through vital submarine cables, protecting Venezuela from external espionage. Beidou and secure navigation. The center also serves as a monitoring station for the Chinese navigation system Beidou, offering Venezuela a safe and sovereign alternative to GPS, which the U.S. has demonstrated the ability to manipulate. The greatest victory is not interception, but the ability to guarantee stability. China, through its 5G, 6G infrastructure, is providing the key to digital stability in the Caribbean. In a crisis scenario, they can prevent the U.S. from paralyzing Venezuela's communications and data flow, ensuring the country's logistics and financial stability, despite sanctions. Russia complements the Chinese defense with its specialty, electronic warfare, transforming the Caribbean's air and sea space into an electronic aggression denial zone. Intelligence reports suggest that Russia has supplied an advanced electronic warfare system, such as the Krasuka 4 or similar, which has been installed in a strategic location in Venezuela. The power of anti-jamming. The Krasuka 4 is known for its ability to neutralize and blind radars, aircraft and spy satellites within a radius of hundreds of kilometers. The target. The main target is GPS jamming and satellite communications of the U.S. Navy and Air Force, which have been used to destabilize the region. Interference with GPS, which affects civil and military navigation, is now neutralized. The proof. The increase in GPS jamming incidents off the coast of Venezuela, reported by experts, is the clearest sign that this system is already active and being tested, forcing the U.S. to retreat in its electronic warfare tactics. For the older audience, the impact on GPS is the key to engagement. Imagine that the cargo ship bringing your coffee in your car, which was previously subject to navigation errors caused by U.S. interference, can now navigate safely in the Caribbean. The Russian electronic defense is not just military. It guarantees the stability of global trade and protects the Venezuelan economy from external pressure. The U.S. response to this invisible defense is complex, as a direct attack on a Chinese telecommunications center or a Russian electronic warfare system would be an act of open aggression. The U.S. is being forced to respond in kind, intelligence, and electronic warfare. Submarine mapping. The Southern Command, SOUTHCOM, is intensifying the use of oceanographic survey ships and unmanned underwater vehicles to map submarine cables and Venezuelan telecommunications infrastructure, looking for vulnerabilities. Counter-jamming. The U.S. is activating its own electronic warfare systems to try to neutralize the Russian system, creating an invisible battle of frequencies over the Caribbean. The escalation scenario. The highest risk is a frequency incident, where mutual interference causes a civil aircraft to crash or ships to collide, forcing an open military response. The Monroe Doctrine, which prohibits the intervention of external powers in the hemisphere, is being violated in a way Monroe never imagined. The Monroe Doctrine was designed for warships and armies. It has no clauses for fiber optic cables and GPS systems. China and Russia found the perfect loophole. They did not invade Venezuela. They transformed it into an advanced outpost of information defense, undermining the U.S. ability to impose its will from the inside out. The cyber and electronic crisis in Venezuela is not an isolated event. It is part of a larger strategy to expose U.S. vulnerability and redefine power in the hemisphere. The greatest U.S. vulnerability lies in the fiber optic submarine, cables that carry 99% of intercontinental data traffic. Venezuela is strategically positioned to monitor and potentially sabotage these cables. The Chinese cyber bunker not only collects data but also maps the exact location of the cables, preparing the ground for future sabotage. China and Russia are exploiting U.S. dependence on digital infrastructure, turning the Caribbean into a digital choke point. Direct economic impact. The threat of sabotage raises the cost of marine insurance and freight, directly impacting the prices of imported products in the U.S. and Europe. The invisible war hits the consumer's pocket. The cascade effect. A disruption of submarine cables would cause a collapse in financial transactions, communications, and internet services, paralyzing the global economy. The Cuba factor and the expansion of the espionage network. The U.S. intelligence community fears that the cyber bunker in Venezuela is just the first step. The Lord's Base. There are suspicions that Russia is seeking to reactivate the Lord's Base in Cuba, which was a signals intelligence center during the Cold War. The espionage network. The coordination between a Chinese data center in Venezuela and a Russian listening center in Cuba would create an espionage and electronic warfare network covering the entire Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, making U.S. security a mirage. The point of no return. The confirmation of a Russian base in Cuba, combined with the cyber presence in Venezuela, would be the point of no return for the Monroe Doctrine, forcing a high-level military or diplomatic response. The crisis forces the U.S. to redefine its foreign and defense policy, recognizing the new nature of the threat. The Sino-Russian strategy in Venezuela aligns perfectly with the Gerasimov Doctrine, which advocates hybrid warfare, where the line between war and peace is blurred. Non-linear threat. The presence of electronic warfare and cyber espionage assets is a form of non-linear deterrence. It is not an invasion but a constant and existential threat. Resilience test. Venezuela is being used as a laboratory to test the U.S. capacity to respond to a threat that does not fit traditional war models. The SIL crisis does not only affect the U.S., Brazil, and other South American countries depend on the same submarine, cable, and GPS infrastructure. Shared vulnerability. Digital instability in the Caribbean threatens the regional security and digital sovereignty of all neighboring countries. Diplomatic pressure. China and Russia are using Venezuela to test the response capacity of the Hemispheric Security Alliance, forcing Brazil to take a stand on digital sovereignty. The crisis forces the U.S. to create a doctrine of digital sovereignty for the hemisphere, which defines cyber espionage and electronic warfare as acts of aggression. Definition of aggression. The new doctrine would need to classify interference with submarine cables or GPS denial as acts of war, allowing a military or cyber response. The cost of inaction. U.S. inaction would be seen globally as a sign of weakness, accelerating the transition to a multipolar world where American hegemony is challenged even in its own hemisphere. The installation of the Sino-Russian cyber bunker in Venezuela marks the beginning of a new era. War is no longer about who has the biggest ship, but who controls the flow of information. The Caribbean has become the digital battlefield, where everyone's security is at stake. The big question is, can the U.S. dismantle this invisible threat without provoking an open military escalation with China and Russia? The installation of the cyber bunker generated a heated debate in the Pentagon. The traditional response would be the mobilization of warships, but this does not solve the digital problem. The response must be asymmetric, a cyber counteroffensive. However, a cyber attack on a Chinese or Russian asset in Venezuelan territory can be interpreted as an act of war, with the risk of escalation. The dilemma is how to respond to an invisible threat without provoking a visible war. The Monroe Doctrine, which prohibits the intervention of external powers in the hemisphere, is being violated in a way Monroe never imagined. China and Russia found the perfect loophole. They did not invade Venezuela. They transformed it into an advanced outpost of information warfare, undermining U.S. security from the inside out. The crisis forces the U.S. to create a doctrine of digital sovereignty for the hemisphere, which defines cyber espionage and electronic warfare as acts of aggression. The crisis does not only affect the U.S., Brazil, and other South American countries depend on the same submarine, cable, and GPS infrastructure. Digital instability in the Caribbean threatens regional security. China and Russia are using Venezuela to test the response capacity of the Hemispheric Security Alliance, forcing Brazil to take a stand on digital sovereignty. For the audience, the analogy with the Cold War is an immediate engagement point. The cyber shield in Venezuela is not just a technological defense. It is the establishment of a digital iron curtain in the Caribbean, an invisible barrier separating the Western Hemisphere from Sino-Russian technological and military influence. Analogy with Berlin. Just as the Berlin Wall divided the physical world, this new digital infrastructure divides the world of information. On one side, the data and navigation network controlled by the U.S. On the other, the sovereign network protected by Beidou and Russian electronic warfare systems. Existential threat. The threat is no longer the invasion of tanks, but the paralysis of modern life. The audience understands the fear of the Cold War, and the idea that a button in Caracas can turn off a ship's GPS or a bank system in Miami is a tangible existential threat. The most concrete threat to the public is the economic impact. The Chinese and Russian cyber bunker does not only target military objectives, it threatens the backbone of global trade and finance. Threat to SWIFT and the stock market. The ability to monitor and, potentially, interfere with the data traffic of submarine cables puts global financial transactions at risk. A coordinated cyber attack on a vital communication node could paralyze the SWIFT system, the heart of international bank transfers. Increased cost of living. Instability in the Caribbean, caused by electronic warfare, raises the cost of marine insurance. This cost is passed on to the final consumer, increasing the price of everything from fuel to imported products. The invisible war hits the common citizen's pocket. The Pentagon is caught in a dilemma. The traditional military response is ineffective against a digital threat. The cyber option. The only effective response would be a cyber counteroffensive to disable the cyber shield. However, an attack on a Chinese or Russian asset in Venezuelan territory is an act of war, with the risk of nuclear escalation. The diplomatic option. The U.S. is being forced to negotiate digital sovereignty, recognizing the presence of external powers in its backyard. This is a geopolitical defeat for the Monroe Doctrine. The cyber shield becomes more robust and integrated with each passing day. Time is running out for the U.S. To underscore the seriousness of the threat, it is crucial to detail the power of the Russian system, translating technical specifications into terms of military impact. Range and coverage. The Krasuka 4 system, or its modernized equivalent, has an operational range that can reach 300 kilometers, strategically positioned on the Venezuelan coast. This means it can create an electronic denial dome, covering the air and sea space of a large part of the Caribbean, including vital navigation routes to the Panama Canal and U.S. military bases in Puerto Rico and Key West. Specific targets. The system is designed to blind the radars of reconnaissance aircraft, low-orbit spy satellites, and, crucially, radar-guided cruise missile systems. In simple terms, it makes U.S. military assets blind and deaf in the region. The psychological effect. The presence of such a powerful system is, in itself, an act of deterrence. The Pentagon needs to recalculate every reconnaissance mission and every naval movement, knowing that its communication and navigation systems can be turned off at any moment. The Chinese contribution is more subtle, but equally dangerous, focusing on the control of communication infrastructure. The data center and information traffic. The Chinese data center is not just a storage location, it is an interconnection point for Venezuela's 5G, 6G network. This allows China not only to protect Venezuelan traffic, but also to monitor and analyze data traffic passing nearby, including communications from neighboring companies and governments. The Beidou advantage. The integration of the Beidou navigation system offers critical redundancy. If the U.S. tries to disable GPS in the region, Venezuela and its Chinese and Russian allies can continue to operate with precision, giving them a tactical and logistical advantage in any crisis scenario. To illustrate the impact, the script must present a plausible and high-impact crisis scenario, the Mona Passage. The Mona Passage, between the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, is a vital choke point for U.S. naval traffic. The blockade. In an escalation scenario, the cyber shield could be activated to create an electronic blockade over the Mona Passage. U.S. ships and aircraft attempting to pass would have their navigation and communication systems degraded, forcing them to navigate blindly or retreat. The implication: an electronic blockade in the Mona Passage would be the modern equivalent of a naval blockade, but without firing a single shot. It would be a demonstration of force that would expose U.S. vulnerability and force an immediate response. For the audience, the Monroe Doctrine is a pillar of American foreign policy. The current crisis must be framed as the final collapse of this pillar. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 was the height of the Monroe Doctrine. The Soviet Union was forced to back down. What is happening now is the opposite. China and Russia are establishing a strategic presence subtly, without visible nuclear missiles, but with an equally potent threat. The digital Iron Curtain in the Caribbean is the manifestation of the new Cold War. It is not a war of ideologies, but of technology and information control. The audience understands the gravity of a Cold War, and this analogy elevates the topic of cybersecurity from a technical concept to an existential, geopolitical threat. The urgency of the crisis must be the final point to ensure retention and engagement. Every day, the Sino-Russian infrastructure is consolidated. The window of opportunity for the U.S. to respond without a military escalation is closing. If the Monroe Doctrine cannot protect the U.S. from an invisible threat 300 kilometers from its coast, what else can it not protect?